our vision at Tourism Australia is really centred on this piece about making Australia both memorable and desirable. And that really is at the heart of our marketing purpose, which is to invite people from around the world to experience the Australia way of life. And the way that we do that is through our various campaigns, our various partnerships in market with the STOs, but also with the trade, airline partners and others. And over the last 12 months, we've had a good year. So what I'd like to do now is show a very short video which brings to life the year that was since we last caught up back in May in Sydney.
In 2017, Australia welcomed record numbers of international visitors, and we continue to work hard to tell the world why there's nothing like Australia. Let's look at highlights of some of our recent activities around the world. In the Americas, where our efforts are focused on the US and Canada, one of our biggest highlights this year has been the launch of our Dundee-inspired campaign to supercharge the value of North American tourism down under. In February, at the Super Bowl, over 100 million Americans watched as an official film trailer for a new Crocodile Dundee movie cleverly switched into an incredible showcase for Australian tourism. In Canada, we continue to work closely with trade partners and Aussie specialists to reach high-value travellers. Over in the UK, which received the historic first Qantas Dreamliner flights direct from Perth to London this year, our team in London recently launched a new campaign introducing some of the 24 million friendly Australian locals who are all potential mates just waiting to share their inside knowledge with British visitors. The UK has also been one of the key markets where we've been highlighting experiences for visitors during or after the Gold Coast 2018 Commonwealth Games. Also in the UK and across Europe and Germany, France and Italy, a big highlight has been the launch of Aussie News Today. This tongue-in-cheek campaign serves up fun, irreverent and uplifting news stories of daily life down under into the news feeds of young travellers, a critically important part of Australia's visitor mix. In North Asia, our teams are based in mainland China, Hong Kong, Japan and South Korea. The 2017 China-Australia Year of Tourism was a fantastic opportunity to promote Australian tourism in China and recognise the importance of the China market for our industry. While in nearby Hong Kong, our team has been working hard on helping agents become qualified Aussie specialists. In Japan, we signed a new agreement with the country's largest travel company, JTB, to run a nationwide campaign focusing on the Australian market in 2018. While in South Korea, we continue a strong focus on partnerships and working with influencers to drive this fashion-conscious market. In the South and Southeast Asia region, we focus on the more established markets of Singapore and Malaysia, as well as India and Indonesia, which have high growth potential. In Singapore and Malaysia, we kicked off 2018 with our partner Singapore Airlines with an online campaign promoting competitive fares and showcasing Australia's food and wine and aquatic and coastal experiences. Last year in Malaysia, we were also proud to pick up a Marketing Excellence Award for our campaign with Enrich, Malaysia Airlines loyalty program, which encouraged frequent flyers to use their points on a trip down under. In India, Bollywood actress and friend of Australia, Pariniti Chopra, has been sharing her Australian holiday experiences to millions of fans. Capitalising on the buzz Pariniti created, we launched the Great Australian Airfare Sale, offering Indian travellers attractive deals down under. And in Indonesia, we hosted a 4-day Australian travel fair in Jakarta, supported by 4 airlines and 5 key distribution partners. Across the ditch, we hosted 60 of New Zealand's top event planners at special events showcasing Australia's exceptional food and wine and business events capabilities. While our activity in New Zealand is focused on business events, we recently relaunched the award-winning Aussie Specialist Program for Kiwi travel agents. Our specialist unit, Business Events Australia, is also active in China, North America, the UK and Europe, as well as New Zealand. A major highlight this year has been a national bid fund, making $12 million available over the next 3 years to support bids for a new high-value international incentive, association and exhibition events. Another highlight was one of China's largest direct selling organisations, Amway, selecting Cairns to host its flagship corporate incentive event for up to 8,000 agents in 2019. It's been a successful year for Australia, and with a positive outlook for tourism globally, we're looking forward to another year ahead, working with industry partners to make Australia the most desirable and memorable destination on earth.
So I hope that gives you a very quick summary from around the world, but going into some of the numbers in a little bit more detail. As many of you know, in 2010, our industry started on a journey for the Tourism 2020 long-term strategy. And as part of that now, as we stand here today in 2018, the part of the strategy that we're in is the seeing the results phase. And from a demand perspective, if we stood still today and turned the clocks forward to 31 December 2020, in that original goal we set of being between 115 and 140 billion, we'd end up at about 130 billion with about 10 million international visitors coming to our shores. So certainly if you think about when the strategy was first set, that a do-nothing approach to this would have seen us at 2020 hit $92 billion, this strategy certainly has reaped dividend. What's also very interesting for us now is that we've seen a great acceleration in the number of Asian visitors to our country. And as we stand here today, almost 50% of our visitors to Australia are from those Asian countries that we mentioned during the course of the video. If we also dive into that from an international perspective and really have a look at the numbers that we talked to you about this time last year at ATE 2017, we've seen growth of around about 6% for international visitor expenditure. That 6%, to put that in context, is about 4 times the growth rate of the Australian economy at the moment. So tourism as a sector in our country is growing faster than most other sectors in the nation as we currently stand here today. Of course, no surprises that China is our number one market in terms of visitor expenditure. It's chasing down those our cousins across the ditch in New Zealand, and we think that during the course of 2018 it will become number one in both visitor numbers but also expenditure. But what's really interesting is that the growth rate acceleration has come out of markets like India in particular, which is now growing at 16% and has been our fastest growing market in terms of visitor expenditure over the last 12 months. The trends we're seeing qualitatively that are coming out of our visitors into Australia at the moment, and no surprises from these types of factors, is that we're seeing a shorter stay, but also we're seeing this thirst for experiences, this ability to get behind the stories of destinations, the stories of landmarks, to really understand what lies behind them, as opposed to just taking a photograph of Penfolds Estate. You want to get into the cellars and actually understand the story behind the winemaker. So these are some of the broader trends we're seeing. Of course, it's not only just about demand, it's also about supply. And when I talk about supply, I mean hotel investment, I mean aviation development, and the hard infrastructure that goes along to support the growth of the tourism industry here in Australia. And certainly what we've seen over the last 12 months is a very solid growth rate in terms of aviation capacity, led out of markets like China, like Canada, and also Japan. And indeed, being here in South Australia, one of the big highlights has been the introduction of direct services from Guangzhou into Adelaide, but really importantly in our major capitals, in places like Sydney and like Melbourne, we're now starting to see the expansion of secondary city aviation capacity direct into those markets, which we believe is also really critical to the long-term growth of the Chinese market. And then, of course, with the launch of the Qantas Streamliner, we now have the opportunity to really position Western Australia as a Western gateway for the rest of the country as we look at further developing aviation capacity in that market. Our opportunity as a country is really being driven out of these two markets, the United States and also China. And when we talked to you last year, we talked about the emerging opportunity out of the United States. We all know the opportunity that does exist out of mainland China, and we're continuing to chase that. But we do believe that these two markets now are shaping up as the must-win markets for us as an international destination because of the volume and scale that they drive, the type of visitors that they provide, the dispersal that these visitors provide, and also the size of the opportunity that we have to take advantage of those two markets in particular. One of the key things for us, though, over the last 12 months has been how do we differentiate the brand? And Lisa Ronson our Chief Marketing Officer and her team have done a lot of work at looking at how do we really bring to life this marketing purpose, this purpose about saying to people, come to our country to experience the Australian way of life. We know from our research just how strongly Australia resonates on things like food and wine, our amazing wildlife, and also our natural beauty of the country. But we also know from doing our competitive research that there are many other countries around the world that offer that. If you talk to Americans, they can point to some pretty good beaches to the south, down in this little place called the Caribbean. You know, our friends in Africa, which are big market appeals for European visitors, which are still very important for us in Australia. They talk about the wildlife in Africa. So we need to find something that we believe distinguishes that. And we believe that it really comes back to our people. You know, there's a great saying once said by Paul Hogan, who said to us when we were doing the Dundee campaign, that you don't invite people over for dinner to show them a piece of furniture or a bottle of wine. You invite them over to converse, you invite them over to experience their company. And it's no different when you come to tourism and international visitation. So we believe that in combination with those strong factors of our food and wine, our natural beauty and our nature and wildlife, we believe our people give us a distinct competitive advantage, particularly when you also overlay the fact that we have the longest continuous Indigenous culture of any country in the world. We believe that that's a great platform for us to be able to sell Australia in our source markets. And it's not just My Tummy Compass telling us that, it's really backed up by our research that we do through our Consumer Demand Project, which you can really see from this, that the top two things that really do resonate very strongly in terms of growth over the last 12 months have been about safety and security, which implies friendliness, and also the welcoming nature of citizens. Now, people are looking for this when they travel abroad, and that's why we think that this factor, coupled with those amazing attributes of our country, provide us with a distinct competitive advantage. In addition to that, it's also about cut-through. You know, this is a very crowded market. There are a number of countries out there competing for the share of that lucrative international visitor dollar. We're not the only country around the world that's recognised that the tourism sector is a great economic opportunity amongst everything else. So for us over the last 12 months, it really has been about trying to find platforms which give us absolute cut-through. You know, we have a budget of about $150 million per annum. If you take a market like the United States, that's just a little bit over what Expedia spends on a per annum basis in advertising in that market itself. So for us, the platforms that we are choosing, the platforms that we will continue to chase, are those platforms which give us cut-through in the right markets, using the right principles and strategies behind it. Which leads me to this little project. This project that was in incubation when we last caught up in Sydney, something that myself and my executive team couldn't talk to you about, which if you ask many people is a very hard thing for me. But this is something that we took those attributes about Australia that we talked about before, our food and wine, our natural beauty, and also our wildlife, and we overlaid that distinguishing character of our people, taking advantage of something that's become very, very important, we believe now, in just general consumer trends, the nostalgia economy. You only have to look at the movies that are being remade, you only have to look at the TV sitcoms that are being remade to see how much people want to go back to a time when things were probably a little bit simpler. So what I'd like to share with you now is a very quick case study on what we've seen from the marketing results of this campaign, which launched in early January, although not be formal launch per se, but will continue to run as we head towards 2020.
Good day, losers. You got your first look at Danny McBride for the new Dundee trailer.
All of a sudden, my news feed blows up. Danny McBride is the son of Crocodile Dundee. Crocodile Dundee. Crocodile Dundee.
The internet lit up when Chris Hemsworth appeared in a trailer for a brand new Crocodile Dundee film.
There's an official website
pristine beach, mate.
Hey, David, White says.
Wait, hold up. This isn't a movie. No. It's tourism ad for Australia. Yes.
It was a commercial.
Chris Hemsworth's Dundee movie has been outed as a big marketing stunt.
You thought you were watching a trailer for Crocodile Dundee. I just thought it was hysterical.
They brought this up about a year ago, and I thought it was a fantastic idea.
I want to see Australia, but it turns out Danny McBride just made that up for a movie. It's not a real place.
It made me want to go right away.
One hell of a sales pitch right here. Australia looks beautiful.
A terrific campaign.
Just a day after its release in America, Crocodile Dundee trailer spoof has been viewed 75 million times.
All for a Super Bowl ad that's going to be one of the best in history.
It's Crocodile Dundee since Crocodile Dundee.
Really?
Fans are fighting to make the sequel a reality. Even director Judd Apatow wants to know when he can start shooting.
Thank you, and if you would like a crash course on the mechanics of Hollywood, please see Lisa, Jeff Eoghan, and the rest of our marketing team. But we've been very proud of that campaign for a number of reasons, because it took those principles we spoke about earlier in the presentation, and we really reintroduced this concept of Australian people, which we haven't done in the North American market or around the world since the Come Say G'day ads. And we think that the results of this campaign, which, remembering that it's not just about the next 12 months, it's also out to 2020, we believe that this attribute of Australia is something that we can continue to dial up on. You saw a lot of metrics in that video, so I won't continue to go through that, but what we've been really pleased about is the platform that it's been able to give us, and most importantly our trade and aviation partners, the platform to talk about Australia. And many of the partners that you'll see here today who are out on the shop floor will be able to tell you about the increase in interest that they've had, but most importantly what we're now starting to see in terms of conversion of actual sales about Australia. We've seen yields increase from 16 to 20%. We've seen sales in a number of our trade partners increase by 30 to 40%. And that for us is really about what the heart of the campaign activity was about driving awareness, getting Australia talked about again in the minds of not only North American consumers, but also in markets like the UK. We are also trialling this campaign in social media in China as well, because the original film was very much recognised back in the 1980s in that market. And then also importantly translating that into sales. But as I also said earlier on, for us, it's not also just about the 60 seconds on the 4th of February and the ensuing resonance from that. It's also been about launching some other stories in and around about the country. And what we have launched on social media is this concept called Why Australia. And what Why Australia is about, it's about taking those attributes that we talked about before, food and wine, coastal and aquatic. We're talking about Indigenous culture for the first time. We're talking about the quokka from Western Australia. We're talking about other attributes, sports and events. We're talking about other attributes of the country, but told through the eyes of notable Australians. And we picked 4 Australians. Chris Hemsworth, we picked Curtis Stone, Jessica Malboy, who is going to become increasingly much more part of our activities offshore, and also a great friend of Australia, Matt Wright. For those of you that don't know who Matt is, he's the monster croc wrangler from the Northern Territory. What I'd like to show you now is one of those editions clips, which is our food and wine clip, given that we're here in South Australia. And these were released on social media and digital channels and are currently running in market at the moment.
Welcome to Why Australia. I'm Danny McBride, and today I'm here with fancy Australian chef Curtis Stone. Good to see you.
How are you, man?
Doing really good. I got a question for you. Is the only thing to eat here shrimp on the barbie?
We have beautiful seafood right from all over the country. We have a bunch of different climates. So great grass-fed beef, great grass-fed lamb. So I need a big barbie because I'll be slipping so much on
You'll be slipping everything on the barbie. I like that. Is Attica a heavy metal band or an artsy-fartsy film?
It's actually a restaurant.
Really?
In Melbourne, incredible guy, Ben Shuri. He grows all of his own stuff, and the food, it blows your mind. One of the best in the world.
Curtis, I thought Australia was a land of beer. What's all this talk about wine?
We produce beautiful wines, sophisticated, really intelligent winemaking, and we've got 60 wine regions, so we've got a beautiful bunch of wines here.
Curtis, what wine should we drink as soon as we finish this interview?
Cabernet Sauvignon or Chardonnay. They're my two favourite varietals coming out of Australia right now. Really sophisticated, beautiful wines.
Okay. Curtis, what exactly is this? This doesn't even seem like this is real.
It's in Wineglass Bay, which is down in Tasmania, and the particular hotel that these guys are at, they give you waiters, you walk out to a table, you can do shuck oysters, and that's legit. That's what they're doing.
This is real. This is not photoshopped.
No.
This is real.
It's real.
What about this right here?
This is in Kangaroo Island. This is a realistic option when you come out here. Cooking a barbie, setting up a table with this unbelievable view.
This is amazing. I don't understand how they can get all these chairs just out in the middle of these beautiful landscapes.
Well, they just carry them.
Oh, they don't grow there. They bring them there.
That's it.
It makes more sense. And the kangaroos, they're the waiters at this restaurant?
So again, a light-hearted way of looking at the country, but also with some key facts around Australia. And importantly, with the Dundee campaign, we have now some 200 odd assets off the back of that. Every part of every state and territory around the country is covered as part of that. And through Why Australia, we brought it to life in a little bit more of a light-hearted way, using Danny and those 4 other Australians. Of course, it all hasn't just been about the Dundee campaign. A really key campaign that we launched in October last year was Aussie News Today, which is really focused on that very important youth market. And this is a campaign for us that has been introduced to really for us to grab our share of this market as we head towards the year 2020. One of the key things for us that we're doing at the moment in and around youth, particularly around working holiday makers, is actually understanding a little bit more about markets like the UK and also Germany, where we've seen some either flattening of growth or decline of growth, to actually understand what exactly is happening in those markets from an Australian perspective. This is a campaign that will continue to roll out over the next 12 months, but it's so important for our country, not only from a fact of numbers, and you can see from the slide there that youth provide about 46% of our expenditure, but from a working holiday maker specifically to a really important source of labour for many of those experiences that you've seen featured in our marketing campaigns that we take around the world. So a very important focus for us in the year ahead. In addition to that, in the area of business events, I'm really delighted to report that since we last caught up, that we have launched with Business Events Australia a new $12 million boost fund. And that boost fund is there designed to support our state and territory colleagues in convention bureaus, exhibition organisers, incentive groups that are in a competitive bid situation that meet an economic impact criteria to help them try and get a more competitive bid on the table to assist them in securing the business for Australia. This is a really important opportunity for us from an Australian perspective. If you think about the supply that we have coming into our country, if you think about the quality of our convention centres, you only have to look at this convention centre that we've been in here today, but also the opportunity and scale that these events provide us, plus the fact that we also know that about 90% of first-time visitors that come to a country as part of a business event are more likely to repeat as a leisure visitor moving forward. So that bid fund is something that we're very excited about. And one of the results of, you can see the tangible results you can see from this, has been our partnership with Amway out of China. And in 2019, we're taking the Amway China Conference for the first time into a regional part of Australia, into tropical North Queensland, into Cairns. We had great success with this event in partnership with Business Events Sydney and Destination New South Wales for the Amway 2017 conference. So again, this gives you the type of scale and platform that one event with 8,000 delegates can provide the country, and particularly regional parts of our country as well. And the benefits flow into our operators and experiences and other things also. Finally, before I conclude and hand over to Rodney, the other key part of our focus this year and over the last 12 months is signature experiences. You know, as I said before, one of the key trends we're seeing internationally is that people are travelling for experiences. We also know that these types of experiences that we're talking about, things like golf, wine and luxury lodges, etc., provide a great halo effect for our country. They provide something for us to talk about, and you only have to look at the impact that Southern Ocean Lodge has had on this state to really recognise that, and it recently celebrated its 10th birthday. For us, we took a decision about 2 years ago to not only fortify and continue with the 4 original partners that we had in the program, but also expand it. And we now have 7 collectives, each of which cover about 153 businesses across the country. But most importantly, these collectives provide about 550 bookable, commissionable products for the trade that are all downstairs. And if you go for a walk downstairs later on today, you will see the booths of those 7 collectives set up and actually actively engaging in appointments during the course of the week. It's a great platform for us to sell at a more niche and high-level market, but importantly, get that halo of the country continuing. We are looking at expanding the program. We are looking at one around cultural attractions at the moment, and we've started to dabble a little bit into the super yacht area, which is one that I'll take a personal interest in if it ever gets off the ground. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for your attention and your time this morning. It's been a great pleasure welcoming you here, back to Australia, back to Adelaide. Look forward to taking your questions later on this morning, and it gives me great pleasure now to introduce Rodney Harricks, the CEO of the SATC. Thank you.